What I need you to do now, I can see a number of people have done already, is you need to vote on our entry poll. Before you start to hear the arguments, let's determine where your current preferences lie, whether they're in the commercial property arena or residential. Then our adversaries are going to put their initial pitch to the room, where subsequent to that, they're going to be subject to questions. And if you want to ask a question, then please go into the chat box and type your question into the chat box at any time, and that we will come back after the two adversaries have made their initial pitches, and we will come back and ask your questions to them. And then at the end of or towards the end of the debate, we're going to put another poll up to ask you to vote who's going to be the winner. So lots of fun and games. This is meant to be light-hearted. It's meant to be entertaining, but I'm certain it's going to be very, very informative as well, with these two heavyweights that we have here from the property arena. So without further ado, we're going to start on the residential. So Adam Lawrence, make your case.
Am I timed, Rupert, just so I know?
No, you're not timed. You have as long or as little as you like.
I think it's simple then. I might just won't let Andrew speak. That's absolutely fine. So I think you've given Andrew a bit of a hospital pass here. So I've got to start by saying to Andrew, well done for taking on commercial. Probably realistically the most difficult time for commercial property investment for the last 12 or 13 years. Although I'm sure he's gonna rebuff that quite considerably. But realistically, I think back to when I first started getting involved seriously in residential property, and really what I wanted to do was get involved in something that was a staple good. I didn't want to. I'd been in various environments where there was a lot of flux. They were very dynamic. They were quite exciting to work in, but they were also quite tiring. And in some of them, you needed to almost re-engineer what you were doing on a month-to-month or a quarter-to-quarter basis. And ultimately, looking at where there was safety and security, I looked at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, really. And there was food, there was shelter, and there was love. And I didn't fancy getting into the love business because that's not really my sort of thing. So the food business always looked very difficult to me. I'm a good consumer of it, but I'm not sure I'd be a great purveyor of restaurants, etc. And so shelter seemed to be the obvious place. I know shelter's a bit of a dirty word in property, but you know what I mean. Shelter seemed to be the way forward. So looked into it seriously and came to the conclusion that ultimately a very, very robust market is out there for residential property. It trades, 1 million to 1.5 million houses a year trade in the UK. So very established, easy at any other time other than now, obviously, but easier to trade and move on. Liquidatable in auctions that have, pretty robust marketplaces, but yields are strong. Mortgages are low or very low these days. Good opportunities to fix rates and take that sort of risk level away from it. Not enough houses being built, as the housing crisis as we know it, and just so much to like about residential property. The other thing that was really key to me was that it was not as difficult as maybe it should have been compared to other asset classes to buy at a discount and to improve quite considerably. And the length of time, the length of hold time without big voids in the middle, like you can get in commercial with big costly voids where you've got business rates to consider. The downside risk is lower. So really for me, Resi's always offered that thing that really shouldn't be available in property. And ultimately the figures do bear this out. There was a decent, fairly robust survey done over about 30 years of the market of property and asset classes. And leveraged buy-to-let was an incredible performer, returned about 17% year on year over 30 years. Second place was unleveraged buy-to-let. Third place was commercial property. Fourth place was equities. So that probably tells you exactly where property in general is at. But what I saw was an opportunity to get less risk and more return, which should really be the holy grail to any of us as investors. And ultimately, that's what I've been able to do. Not massive penalties when properties are void, relatively easy to let, very easy to get geographical spread, easier than it really should be to buy at a discount. Strong yielding, holds up in environments like this, but also flexible. So, and that flexibility could be residential to HMO to serviced accommodation. It could be to social housing providers. There's lots and lots of different things you can do with a residential property. Now, some of those things that you layer on top mean more risk, more effort, more return. But the point is that the possibilities are there. Even the possibilities of being a landlord that allows a tenant to sublet, so a rent-to-rent landlord, effectively. All of those options are out there, and there's high demand for all of those in the right places in the right way. So I won't drone on for too long. I could take the whole hour quite happily, but I want to give Andrew a chance to get in there and wish him all the best.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Adam.
sir.
That's a great start. You've made your pitch, you've made your case. I'm just having a look at the entry poll. I can share the results of that right now. And so we're starting the meeting with residential property winning the argument by 64% to commercial property at 36%. So that's what we've got to go at. Andrew, you're starting slightly behind here, but the key is how we can make the change during the course of today. And it's not really a case of where we end up from, but it's a case of actually what results from that basis. So over to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, you've done a brilliant job of setting out the stall for residential. And to be fair, I've got residential myself, so I'm not going to disagree with some of the points that Adam made. But let's start with the big T word, taxation. Section 24, investors go if they are higher rate taxpayers. If you're a high rate taxpayer, you only get 20% tax relief on the interest. It's not a problem generally because most commercials board in limited companies. Residential put to a limited, that's a challenge. Another taxation benefit, I can invest using my pension fund or a SAS, my commercial property. You can't have the tax benefit of being a residential property in a pension fund. Tax embedded capital allowances specifically, I can get a tax refund to 40% of the building's value by acquiring a commercial property. You can't get that in residential. While I'm on about tax, let's have a look at stamp duty. Residential property, 3% additional surcharge. Well, come on, percent additional surcharge for commercial. And if it's a mixed use premise where you've got a shop and residential upper parts as an example, the 3% doesn't apply to that because it's deemed to be commercial. So with the T word, the tax word, let's have a look at regulation. We all love to be regulated highly, don't we? The PRS is, the private rental sector, residential, is so highly regulated. 182 different regulations, I believe. There's national mandatory HMO licensing now. It's not before there's a national register for single lets. Voters are renters. Therefore, there's political drive to actually regulate the residential sector because it gets votes at the polling box. Commercial tenants don't have a vote. So the last time the law was updated was 1954. Well, that's easy to go with. So let's have a look at tenancies. Tenants swap in places every 6 months and have to go and find a new tenant. Well, with commercial, 5, 10, 25-year leases, not unheard of. I absolutely detest getting phone calls from tenants where they turn around and say, The toilet's blocked, you come out and unblock it. The fence is blown down. With commercial, I give out FRI leases, full repair insuring leases. So my tenant unblocks the toilet. My tenant fixes the fence, repairs the roof. Gosh, every pound that comes into my pocket stays in my pocket. I like to get paid in advance. I get paid in advance on commercial rents. I like to have upward only rent reviews. I get that with commercial. You don't get that with residential. You have to take the market rate. Sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. Commercial's one way, it's up. Financial freedom. We've all heard that word bandied around. Who wants financial freedom? Residential, an active method of investment. Commercial is massive because you don't repair, you check the bank account 4 times a year, your account bill. It's easier to manage when you get old. You don't have to be working as active the business. And tenants, they get to the end of the tenancy and they do a bump or they leave the place in a mess. Well, I've got dilapidations, my commercial tenant. Take a deposit off them, take a covenant, charge a personal house and their assets. Easier to evict if they don't pay. Boom. It's so much easier than residential. And yeah, my voids are less frequent. They may be longer, but they're less frequent than residential. So I'm looking for tenants with covenants. A good covenanted tenant, this is my asset value. If the property is empty, I don't generally have an urgency to get paid. I don't have an urgency to get paid is if my tenant has moved out early before the end of the lease, keep paying until the end of the lease. If their personal assets and house are on the line. I've got a massive range of permitted development rights, and the permitted development rights are brilliant. So I can buy commercial property with 100% bank fund. Do that in residential. Rupert, over to you. I dare say you've got 100 questions after that around for ammunition thrown out there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew. That was good. We've got a slight issue with your audio. We can hear what you're saying, but it's a little bit dodgy. So we're having to listen quite hard to you there. And I know that you're having
apologies
with your internet connection down that end. But I've got some questions. I've got a question to both of you. We'll start with Adam. Has the Chancellor helped you with any funding or tax breaks in the past 2 years?
Yeah, he handed me some money out of his case the other day. No, in seriousness, you know, obviously trading businesses I'm involved in have benefited in different ways from the furlough scheme, although really the main beneficiary has been the employees, which is the point. I've got absolutely no issue with that at this point, definitely. Various businesses that operate out of premises, commercial premises, as it happens, Andrew, are given you know, £10,000 grants. I've got another commercial tenant who's got a 25k grant because it's a pub tenancy, so that's been helpful for them. In terms of some of Andrew's taxation points, while they apply to people who hold property in their personal name, they obviously don't necessarily apply to those of us who are incorporated or were incorporated before Section 24 or who are incorporating. So there's still quite a number of ways in which, I mean, I've personally benefited a significant amount from the way that and it's not what the Chancellor's done in the last couple of years, but also benefit from R&D, also benefit from capital allowances, also benefit from the rules around refurbishment. So by taking a view on how much of a refurbishment is written down as capital and added to the balance sheet value, and then how much is written off as replacement cost against the trading income, it's a very tax efficient way to run a company, such that if you're expanding a portfolio with the finance costs being, especially if you're using bridging finance as well, all those costs being expensible in the now, fully expensible, have been considerably helpful. So I suppose also raising, I suppose when he raised the capital, the CGT, I don't know if that was in the last couple of years or not, on property itself, I suppose that was another reason for people to want to sell, but it didn't cost me anymore if I trade prop co's rather than individual properties. So I suppose that was an indirect help as well. So yeah, it could have been, I guess we all react to the challenges we're given when it comes to the T word, don't we? So I wouldn't necessarily think of him as having helped me, but I don't suppose he's hurt me too badly compared to some unincorporated landlords, for example.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. And we're going to try Andrew again with the same question. During the course of the question, if the sound isn't good, I'm going to stop your video, so you'll just go black, but at least we might hear you better in that situation. So, so Andrew, has the Chancellor helped you with any funding or tax breaks in the past 2 years on the commercial side?
Yeah, in the last weeks, I've had some £10,000 for the business grant, done as a result of COVID-19. Again, furlough is something else I've received. So that is something for the staff, but it takes pressure off the business. So in terms of investment with pensions, that has been a tax break that I've realised. Embedded capital allowance, I've claimed those, and they're very significant. So I think all of those are immediate tax breaks that I've benefited from. And in terms of how I would look at stamp duty on every purchase, I've saved money against residential property. So I'm winning every deal, and it's not on odd deals, not having to incorporate. I'm doing things specifically to aid my business around the taxation arena. So this has helped me in lots of ways.
And I've got another question I'm going to throw first to you, Andrew, and then we're going to go out to the chat room and we're going to pick up some of the questions that are coming from there. So how do you find commercial tenants in the middle of a recession, Andrew?
Well, at the moment, most of the commercial agents actually disappeared from that. So I'm using what I call my guerrilla marketing. I've got yellow bandit boards on the only commercial property I've got vacant, which is actually being converted. So I'm a building team actually working on the site at the moment. But it is a challenge. Similarly, it is a challenge for residential, but I'll let Adam answer that one specifically. It is a challenge with the lockdown. He wants to come out and do viewings. It's not essential business, so we shouldn't be doing it. The benefit there is technically, if I wanted a mortgage payment default, I could, but I've chosen not to at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to just flip that question a little bit for Adam. That basically, how do you deal with tenants in the residential area who just decide that they're going to stick there and not pay their rent? And obviously in a commercial environment, I believe you can get rid of non-rent paying tenants very quickly and easily.
Well, normally speaking, you'd be right, Rupert, but obviously not at this time because there's a moratorium on commercial evictions just as there is on resi evictions. So both of them take, I mean, obviously commercial normally is much faster if you're willing to get bailiffs in and all the rest of it. And it very much depends on the sort of commercial property you've got, just like it depends on the sort of resi you've got, because covenants it's a transferable thing, really, isn't it? Tenants, look, it's very interesting because at the moment, a lot of the stuff that I've got, which you would, if you were a bond trader, you'd probably describe as junk bonds. The yield quite high. They're in secondary locations in suburbs. They're not places which light people up and think, oh, I'd love to invest in, outer Stoke-on-Trent or whatever. But ultimately, the figures are very good. So from that perspective, the people generally, my target audience is, they're in a suburban 3-bed house. They've got a family. they know and they understand and they're communicative. So they're not going to try and not pay their rent unless they really, really can't, and they're having to choose between rent and food, in which case we're working out payment plans up front. So that all comes back to, just like, I mean, I've certainly in residential had bad tenants in the past. I've also had bad tenants in commercial. So it just depends on what sort of, not every building can be an FRI, wonderful PG lease. And if it is, it might only be returning, 4% gross yield or something. So you're not gearing it up if you're using leverage. So it's not very, very interesting from that perspective. So I suppose I've also got quite a number of social housing lets whereby I'm contracting with registered providers, housing trusts, people like that. So it's that's a bit of a residential hack, really, because it's using a lot of commercial principles, and I accept that in a residential property. So those, I guess, I've mitigated against it by being diversified across geography, diversified across employment sector, diversified across tenant type, and diversified with some, in the past, some HMOs, but these days just in terms of diversification, social housing stuff, and also some very high yielding cheap flats that rent very, very quickly.
That's great. Thanks for that. And we're going to go out to the audience now, and I'm just going to take them in turn. Andrea has asked a question. I'm afraid I'm not going to attempt at your surname, Andrea. Andrew mentioned that we cannot use pension money for residential, but we can for commercial. Andrew, can't we use pension money for residential?
No, SAP and SIS funds are specific for commercial property. Buy development land to build on, but you can't have houses within SIPs or SAS. It is specifically included in the.
Okay, so
can I just jump in there, Rupert?
Oh, indeed you can. We can't.
I have used SAS funds for residential property and continue to do so. So whilst what Andrew says is technically correct, the flexibility of the SAS does give you the ability to loan back funds to other companies, and those companies may or may not invest in residential property. So I work with my SAS advisor to come up with a scheme, not for my own SAS because I haven't got lots of money in there, but for a client of his that I introduced to him. And we came up with a scheme whereby you could quite legitimately recycle 25% of the SAS through a residential property company ad infinitum, because you would be able to do a loan back of a quarter of the fund, and then at the end of the year do another loan back of another quarter of the fund to pay back the first loan, and that loan would revolve. So you can use it to hold resi property. It can be done. It's obviously you need to use, you can't use the whole of the fund for resi, but there are a number of other bits of SAS trickery that also the right people can help you unlock. So to say you can't use it for resi, I think is too far on Andrew's side to let it slide, I'm afraid, Andrew.
No,
well, we want a fair fight.
That's more an intercompany or a pension fund to company loan rather than investing directly in residentials. I take your point.
Potato,
potato. Yeah.
Well, we want a clean fight, but if it's not going to be clean, we're going to enjoy it anyway. Sarah Nuttall has asked, how many issues are you having with non-payment now, though, Andrew? So I think we know which side of the fence is standing.
I was going to say, I don't have a single client who's asked for any deferral or holiday, to use the Chancellor's terminology. So I'm fully paid up by all of my clients, tenants, commercial, residential. It's down to the selection criteria that you like in the first instance. And with commercial, when you point out the benefits got from the government, they're allowed the C bill, that they're allowed the fact that they can furlough the staff, all of those on a commercial tenant, they then sit back and go, yeah. I would, however, add, I don't have any large national blue chip tenants. Large national blue chips are taking the biscuit and they're going, hey, we're going to do it. So
I'm bringing Richard Greenland. Oh, he's gone. He's came and then went. I'm bringing Richard into the room because Richard's made some comments and questions. And you say you agree with Andrew on commercial being a lot less hassle, Richard. We can't hear you. Can you? I'll just unmute you now.
Unmute.
Right, I'd say from my limited experience, it's a lot less hassle, definitely, because there are a lot fewer rules around it. There's a lot more. There's a lot less regulation around it, and it's also business to business, which is a great advantage. So you're dealing with you're much more on a level playing field. Whereas if you're dealing with residential tenants, the law is very much on their side, and if they choose to play silly buggers, it's very hard. It's very hard for you to you're up against it.
So steering on the slightly on the commercial side where you are, and I know you've got a lot of experience in both. Do you have any challenging questions you want to put to Adam or to Andrew?
Yeah, I'd really like to know what Andrew's investing in, because it's so successful, he's not having any problems with defaults, etc. Then yeah, I'd really like to know what type of property that is and where it is, because particularly in these very challenging times, I should imagine there are quite a lot of commercial landlords who are having a problem with this.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, I'll take you back, but thanks for letting us into the room and seeing your jeans on the drying there, Richard.
Oh yeah, this is my mini home office here, and we just worked out this T-shirt's 23 years old. Just stuck it out of the bottom of the drawer.
You haven't been wearing it for 23 years.
No. I wasn't expected to be on the screen today, to be honest, but there you go.
So let's get an answer to that one then.
A lot of commercial tenants are very small business. What I've tended to do is acquire from sort of Northampton down in a southeastward direction commercial property. I've tended to make the units smaller, so there's no business rates for the tenants. I've tended to look for small owner-occupier to there who can give me governance, and they can range from firms, chartered accountants, solicitors, nail bars. People actually own home, and their own home on, so they don't want to have business premises affect their own home by default payments.
Okay, and the other thing that Andrew, Richard has asked as well, or not asked as such, but warned, which I'd like to put to you because you're an accountant, and you have mentioned this, the T word. And Richard said, "Don't let the tax tail wag the business dog." Well, what do you say to that?
Well, I totally agree with that. The first thing, and I'm having this conversation with somebody, is get commercials right. Make the numbers stack. Once you've made the numbers stack and you've worked out the operational profit you'll make, then minimizing the tax cost on the business. So I do totally agree with him. But the tax breaks, and the reason I opened with tax is I knew it would be emotive to everyone out there because everybody hates the word. So by opening with tax and the benefits in a particular model, that's why I focused on it. So yeah, and I saw Richard pop up a supplementary question on screen there about what is it I invest in, shops or offices or what? Typically shops, carving off the back end of shops. The bank I recently bought, that is 3 commercial premises. That is actually going out. The 3 flats are going on a commercial lease to a housing provider.
So it wasn't a lie that you bought the bank then?
It wasn't a lie, no. Sorry, I gave that one away, haven't I? And it was the bank I worked for as well, yes.
Akil has got a question for Adam. What tenant profiling are you going to put in place so you don't fall into difficulty collecting tenant rents?
Yeah, I saw that one pop up. I think it's a good question. I think there's a couple of points I'd make really. One of them is to an extent, it's kind of guided by the property profile itself, in terms of what I mentioned earlier, secondary suburban locations where people do make a home out of it. I appreciate what Andrew says about 6-month contracts, but average rental length in the PRS is 4.3 years. And mine in those sort of locations tend to be longer, if anything, because a kid goes to school somewhere nearby or equivalent. So they tend to be they're quite committed. They have made it their home. So take his point around, if you've got PGs on lease, meaningful PGs on leases, people have put their house up and all the rest of it. But if they live there and they consider it their home, which is what we try and encourage our tenants to do, then they'll obviously they lose it if they get evicted. So they have almost the same level of skin in the game, although they maybe have a different level of assets on their alleys. So part of it is the property profile rather than the tenant profile. But I think we've learned a lot about tenant profiling over the years. But I still think you struggle to get past a lot of gut feel. So we do like to see as much referencing as possible: landlord, employer, landlord before that landlord, if we can. That's very nice to see. Bank statements, pay slips, a chat with the employer ideally, and a chat with the landlord, so we can actually really feel them out rather than to get him fill in some kind of faceless questionnaire, which they either don't bother to do or just tell lies on, quite frankly. And have a chat with the tenant. So a live example at the moment would be we're still filling properties where people have needed to move. So we've had some quite emotional, really, situations over the last few weeks. We had a few voids, and I thought, well, we're going to be sitting on these voids. We're always running a few voids. We've got a big portfolio. But I thought, well, we're going to be sitting on these voids for a couple of months, aren't we? But not so. Actually, what's been happening is people haven't been giving notice, but people are still looking to move, and it's because they've needed to move. So live at home with elderly parents, very keen to get their own place and get away from that situation, because they don't want to put their parents at risk when they're going out. That was from someone who's a self-employed building contractor. So they know they're going to be struggling with social distancing and everything else. And actually, we managed to move them in, did all the referencing, brought it in-house, moved them in within 24 hours remotely without coming into contact with them. So essential, because well, in my view, essential anyway, because it was helping to potentially contribute towards someone not being ill or worse. So there's some of that comes into it, and what I did was I took the chance to speak to the prospective tenant myself, and said, I just felt them out about the current situation, how it was going to affect them. Would they go on furlough or not furlough because they're self-employed, but would they not? Why would they not stay at home and collect the 2,500 quid, which they would qualify for because of their earnings, just to see whether that would be their motivation, what gets them up in the morning, whatever. And they were very, very honest. They hopefully didn't notice exactly what I was asking them, and were very honest and said, no, I want to go out to work. That's what I do. I've been doing this for years. I don't want any problems with site work and all the rest of it when we go back. We're practicing some social distancing stuff at work. I want to be out of work, but I don't want to worry about bringing it home to my parents. So the gut feel / getting into the motivational side of it. So if you ever deal with, if I sort of translate that to LHA tenants, which at the moment, if you're getting paid direct, are probably the greatest covenant in the game of resi or commercial, realistically. It would be the difference between an LHA tenant who believes that benefits are an entitlement and we've heard it time and again, the council pay the rent. Not the case. You pay the rent, the council gives you some support with the rent, and just that difference in the language and the attitude and the ethos. So honestly, these days we treat it more like a job interview, but a job interview where you recruit people on their values, not on the numbers on a screen, because people can, I've had, and certainly in commercial as well, and you've seen it in the commercial world at the moment, the bigger and sharper the tenants, the more aggressive they are with CVAs or threatening not to pay or taking advantage of the scheme not to pay 3 months rent at this time and to try and renegotiate 50% rent breaks and things like that. That ultimately most resi tenants, rightly or wrongly, do not possess that level of commercial sophistication. So it's not on the table for them. So some of it's done by design, I suppose, in terms of the property. Some of it is done by just good old-fashioned, well, not really old-fashioned, because in the old-fashioned world, you don't, recruit tenants on values. So a bit, I suppose, we're a bit new world like that to an extent. But we still look at the fundamentals backing it up, because some people can talk very well and there isn't anything behind the curtain, as we all know.
That was some good punches thrown there, Adam, and some great information. I'm sure we all valued that. We needed it too, because there was a sideshow going on. We didn't expect, but your attention was being competed for by a conversation going on about Richard Greenland's trousers and whether actually he was wearing them.
Not the first time, Rupert. Not the first time.
Yeah, I think we've collared and got to the bottom of that one. And but we have David Bartlett, Andrew, is saying, what would you consider a good yield for the types of commercial property you've suggested? What would be a good yield?
Well, I don't look at the property initially on acquisition as the yield. I look at what I can do with that property first and how I can use the space. If I looked at commercial property, those who understand zoning. And when you talk to a valuer, the valuer will say the first meters into the door of a property are the most valuable. And the next 6 meters are worth 50% first 6. And then the 6 is worth 75% of the initial bit. And then anything further back than 18 meters is worth basically 50p a pound a meter. So what I look at is what I can do and how I can exploit the development rights to actually maximize the unit. And typically, the unit which I'm doing at the moment, which is the bank, what we're doing is we're creating 3 flats there. So the offices on the upper 2 floors are being converted into 2-bed.
Sounds like resi to me, Chairman. Sounds like resi.
Oh, sounds like
resi would make it more valuable.
Well, look like this. It's commercial when I acquired it, and I'm letting it on a commercial lease as well.
Formal objection. Formal objection.
So I'm doing what I call right sizing the unit, so that it then the profile for tenant demand in the area. By virtue of the fact of uplifting, this building, which was acquired for just over 200, goes up around about 700,000 to 800,000. Therefore, the commercial unit is pretty much free. It's sold off the flats, but because I'm putting it all commercial lease, that's what the value is giving us a full price on.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And from Mark Deering here, which will fare better, buy-to-let or commercial, when the government sort out the current mess and start taxing more? And that's quite an interesting question. I do like that question. Yeah. Adam, I think that's challenging you, isn't it?
I think we've probably both got things to say about that, because there's probably direct and indirect consequences without a shadow of a doubt. So what do we all think is going to happen in the short term? Quite possibly, once people are out and able to spend money again on the high street and wherever else in physical real locations rather than on the internet, there may well need to be a bit of a VAT holiday or a VAT break in order to get consumption moving in the economy again. But we know that realistically ends up requiring more money that doesn't hit the exchequer that needs paying back in the long run. So we might see, I think one of the things, an inevitable consequence of this in the next few years is going to be VAT going up, maybe to 25%. And I think that realistically hits resi and commercial, if we're honest, because in resi it certainly hits my tenant profile in the pocket, because it's obviously well known to be a tax that hits the poorer more often than not. But of course, it also hits the customers and the people who buy the services in commercial properties as well. So we probably all share a bit of the incidence on that. I haven't got again, stamp duty's been mooted, hasn't it, as stamp duty breaks being asked for by RICS to get the housing market moving. Once again, that's a short-term solution. He giveth and he will taketh away in the medium term, I have no doubt. Whether we'd see, there seems to be an appetite for, there's obviously the 2% overseas buyer levy that further gone on to the alternative stamp duty list of charges, if you like. So could that be increased? So anybody who's involved in selling any resi properties overseas will be probably hit by that. But will stamp duty go up or down in the long run? I don't. In the medium term, I don't think Boris is a big fan of stamp duty, so I think maybe that's not so much of a concern. But ultimately, where does all the tax really come from, or at least 2/3 of the tax take in the country comes from PAYE and national insurance? So again, if that has to go up, and that does seem again an inevitable, there's probably never been a better time to put national insurance up, because there is so much public support behind the NHS at the moment. It's always well supported, but I don't think many people would dare to blink at the moment if national insurance went up a few pence, realistically. And again, that hits, I think, all of us, Andrew's consumers, my tenants, same people, hits them in the pay packet at the end of the month. And what we've also seen probably manifesting itself is a lower the minimum, not the minimum wage threshold, the personal allowance threshold is now being frozen once again. And once they start freezing it, they don't like unfreezing it very quickly from previous forms. So again, that will creep in as inflation creeps in. People will just be paying more tax. It means less net money in the pocket, and that has to squeeze the whole of the economy. But it probably squeezes those with less income a little bit more, especially if it goes on things like VAT rather than higher rates of tax.
Brilliant, thanks. And I'm coming to the bottom of the questions at the moment, and I'm going to ask a couple from the bottom. So keep them coming in. And if you have asked a question before that's higher up the chat group, and I haven't asked that, then please copy it and paste it again and ask the question once more so that I can see it down here. And we've been looking at the time now. We've been going for 45 minutes. In about 5 minutes time, I'm going to pop up the next poll, which is asking you to vote for who you think has won the debate in this regard. And then before we close the thing, we're going to try to close it on the hour, but before we close, then we have to then revisit those facts that we said about the speakers at the beginning and actually find out which are truth and which are lie. So that's where we are at the moment. But Michael Tran has asked an excellent question, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But before I do, Risk Booth has asked Andrew, do you self-manage your commercial units?
Yeah, well, what management is there? They're FRI. Therefore, I don't have anything to do. There's no repairs, there's no maintenance. There's very little to do.
Okay, and David Bartlett has added to that, how do you find your commercial tenants? And I think, to be fair, that's probably a very, very strong question for you, because it's probably one of the main reasons why people may choose not to go into commercial property.
Yeah, well, there's two ways I handle tenants. Number one, I will run a beauty parade for all the agents, the commercial in an area. And because I've brought everybody to the site and I've asked them their opinion on who they think would make a good tenant, they would do with the building before I do anything with it, and what they would. I've got a good customer base there, and I'm happy to pay any of them a fee for introducing the tenant. I also generally, while I've got building works going on, will put up bandit boards on the outside of the building. So the commercial agents, if you find me a tenant, I'll pay you a commission. And if you, while I'm doing the works, I will just be advertising for it, but I'm not expecting you to find anybody immediately. But if somebody turns up whilst the marketing's going on, I pay a commercial. I use them in that way, and of bringing them all onto site. And generally speaking, it's not like resident 100 agents within any town. they all know I'm active in that market, and they'll start doing more opportunities across the fence.
I'm going to come back to Michael Tran's question, and it's quite interesting looking at the two of you because of the nature of the question.
Michael.
And
Yeah.
but there is an
He's
age
a
gap,
really
I believe,
smart
here.
chap.
You know,
He's a really smart chap.
Michael has said I've got both commercial and residential properties, but the amount of hassles from residential turns my hair grey. But
Clearly
Andrew, you've got grey hair, and Adam,
Clearly
you
not true.
haven't. So,
Clearly not true.
Adam, what do you say to that?
Probably got one or two in there, Rupert, if we have a close. Yeah. I say that
To visit the hairdressers, I can see the grey roots showing through.
Unfortunately, my hairdresser commercial tenants are closed at the moment, Andrew, which is the nature of the beast. But that's a different conversation. But I think the reality is I'm quite fortunate in that I've got lines of defence between myself and the tenants, generally speaking. I understand that. I think a lot of people, the thing is, I can quite easily deride Andrew's 3 or 4% yields on a really, really solid commercial. But ultimately, if it's FRI, that is going to be effectively the net return unless there's a default, realistically. Whereas with Resi, we can talk about, well, I've got some stuff that yields a 14, 15% cash on cash that I bought it on. But Richard's made the comment in the chat there. Ultimately, if you've got stuff at the bottom end, if they don't pay the rent, your yield's nothing, ultimately. So I'll give you an example of that. We bought a block of flats at about 80p in the pound, so more than we would normally pay. But we paid that because it yielded very strongly. It yielded 15% cash on cash, and it was easy enough to finance. And they were just sloggers. We actually gave the management to an agent because we were quite happy to keep that out of house, because we knew the agent would work hard for their money on something like that. And when we did the feasibility on it, we looked at it and said, look, let's look at it on what's our worst case, our best worst case scenario. We only collect 4 out of 6 of the rents every month, which would be a terrible, terrible record, realistically. No one has 33% arrears. And even if we do, we're making 10% cash on cash. We're getting a discount. We're getting reasonable financing on it. So I think you have to set your expectations correctly with Resi. If you apply the same logic to Resi tenants as you do to commercial tenants, I think you will wind yourself up. But then it also depends. Andrew's been very, very clever and strategic with picking the commercial tenants that he engages with, whereas I've tended to buy things where they are mixed use, as Andrew referred to, and I haven't been that interested in the commercial side of it. I've just thought, right, I'll have a hairdresser, I'll have a nail bar, I'll have whatever. I still wanted to have a decent covenant in there, but that hasn't been the core of the strategy, because the most of the value and actually most of the rent is contained within the PD rights and the rears and the tops. So I'm focusing on the Resi, not on the commercial side so much. But I do like the benefits of not necessarily paying the 3% stamp and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I'm trying hard not to take sides here.
But that sounds like he's coming across the fence there.
No,
Doesn't it sound
no,
like
no,
he's
no.
coming across the fence?
No. I shall definitely come back to your side, Andrew. Don't worry. But I do support the idea of buying residential in a commercial wrapper, if you like. In other words, you're buying a commercial building on one title, and it's got Resi in it or Resi opportunities in it, because then you're not subject to that extra stamp duty. But you know, what's for me to add to this is the battle of the heavyweights here. And Sarah Nuttall has said, Andrew, she has said, I'm very keen to start doing some commercial, and the thing that's holding me back is understanding how to recycle cash in a commercial property environment, and I can fully understand that. Sarah is incredibly successful at the moment in doing cookie cutter residential in quite a high priced area of Kent, to be honest. But they're doing some fantastic stuff down there on residential. But how would you do this on commercial? How do you recycle your money? Because the banks aren't throwing much more than about 60% at you, are they?
Well, simply speaking, what I would tend to do, and what I've done, if I use the bank that we're doing at the moment, we've acquired this with peer-to-peer lending, coaching finance. We undertake the works that we want, and then we get the final value that's been forecast on that unit. The bank then lends on the forward valuation. Given the total cost of the unit is about 450 with the works done. The valuation that's been, it has been approximately 700,000. If you take 60% of 700,000, that's a no money in deal. So yeah, you can do that. Alternatively, you don't even need to do any works. If you bought an empty commercial unit based on a bricks and mortar value, and you install a tenant with a good covenant, you then bring the lender in, and they will value that based on the strength of the tenant's covenant, giving you 100% finance pretty much on day one. And the way you can do it on day one is you control the property through the negotiation process on the purchase, and you back to back that with your tenant.
So the bottom line is value enhancement, and I think what you're saying there is that there is, you know, not in every case, but if you look carefully, you can find some very, very good value enhancement opportunities in the commercial field, which may be harder to find, or there may be more people chasing those opportunities in the residential field. So I'm going to continue, but as I continue, I'm just going to launch the poll now, which is who won the debate. So that's going to be an interesting one. We're going to run that for five minutes or so. So that's just gone live. So we'll keep an eye on that while we continue.
Is that, I've just seen Adam vote. He can't vote.
I haven't got a button, unfortunately, Andrew. I wish I did.
No.
I'd vote for you anyway, because I don't want you to take a huge beating. It wouldn't be fair. So,
so I'm now looking. Sarah said, "Thank you very much for that answer." So that's great. I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. There's a number of comments there. Yeah, certainly lots of comments.
I think Mark Deeran's question was certainly a good one. Buy-to-let or commercial going forwards. If I was to put my 10 pence on Mark Deeran's question, I would say short term, the residential market will cover the commercial, because you've got more investors in that marketplace. You've also got homeowners fight. The commercial marketplace, you've only got businesses. And I think businesses are going to be slower coming out of the stagnation that we've had. I think commercial property price will fall low, will be available at discount in residential in short term. However, the commercial will back up and will overtake. The smart thing to be looking for in commercial right now is where you can add value to those properties. And that could be splitting the and turning it into commercial serviced offices. It could be creating some residential space in there. There's a number of ways you can add that value, but I think Mark's question was very good.
Yeah, and I've got, I think it could be the final question unless any more come in, which would time us quite nicely, because we have one more poll to do, and we also have this burning question to answer, which we asked at the beginning of the debate, as to which of these facts are true and which are false. But Akhil has asked one more question. Andrew, what type of tenants are you going to try and secure going forward, bearing in mind the low footfall and people buying from Amazon, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question, Akhil. What I look for are things that can't be done online. You can't get your hair. You can't enjoy a cup of coffee online. We're social animals. We're doing things as social animals that are experiential. So businesses where it has to be person to person are the ones that are going to thrive. Again, I love the commercial to resi brigade, taking commercial office space out of use. A lot of large commercial office footplates are to some extent redundant, because modern technology means we can all work on a tablet, a phone, almost anywhere. We're not printing off reams of paper, so we don't need banks of file cabinets or offices. So the office footprint that people need is smaller. Because the office footprint is small, by taking and repurposing either retail space or larger office space in smaller office spaces, you actually provide for the marketplace going forward. So it's about not trying to do the same as you've always done. It's about predicting where the trends are going and building your business to take advantage of those trends.
Excellent. Well, I'm just looking at that poll now. It seems that people have stopped the voting. So who is the winner of the debate? Well, it's closed. Adam Lawrence has, we've just had another vote come in. Adam Lawrence has 66% of the vote, and Andrew Roberts, I'm afraid, 34%. But I do wonder whether, and it's most unfortunate because Andrew and I have been chatting all morning, absolutely fine, and he has had some real issues with his internet, and I wonder whether the sound may have had some influence on that. So I think you've had a little bit of a leg up there, Mr. Lawrence, but there you are.
I'll take it, Rupert. I think, to be fair, 66-34 is not a bad ratio for where resi versus commercial might be in a nicely mixed portfolio. So if I could try and win with grace for once, then that will...
well, I've just launched another poll, which is, have you changed your mind during the debate? Because that's going to be interesting, isn't it? To see if either of you have actually changed anybody's mind. Yes, we're from commercial to resi. Oh, no. As we can see. So it looks like that although Adam may have won the debate, at the moment it looks like Andrew may have changed more people's minds. So how about that?
I did say Andrew had the hospital pass, so well done to Mr. Roberts. I say.
So there we
Very
go.
well done.
So we're just going to come back.
Enjoyed the debate.
We're going to close this. It's been great fun, and thank you both for your really informative viewpoints there. It's not just been fun, it's been very, very helpful to people as well, and it's prompted a lot of discussion, a lot of questions, which hopefully you'll continue on the Unity Facebook group. We can continue, we can put some results on there, and we can continue the conversation as well. But just coming back at the beginning, and some of the people here haven't seen this or haven't heard this because they were late to the party. We said there was two interesting facts about Andrew. One being that Andrew used to work in a bank, and when he resigned, he got his own back by buying the bank. And the other thing about Andrew is until 3 years ago, Andrew was a cross-country runner, and he raced against Mo Farah, and he came in within 3 minutes of Mo Farah's time. So both quite startling statements there, but which one is true, Andrew?
It is the bank being purchased is true. I mentioned that a couple of times. It was actually my daughter who ran a race before Mo Farah, me, but I did do cross country.
Okay. So you bought the bank. You used to work in the bank. You left the bank. You were no longer working there, and you thought, right, I'll get you back, and you actually bought the building. Is that correct?
It is correct indeed. It is correct.
And when did you buy that?
There will be some video of that very short going out there as well for people to watch.
That's something to tell the grandchildren, isn't it?
Well, I looked at it and I hear so many people saying they want a cash machine. I thought, why buy the cash machine when I can buy the bank and get a bank of cash machines?
Brilliant, absolutely superb. And I'm sure you're one of the few people who can actually go into a bank with a crowbar and not get arrested.
We've certainly a lot of that recently.
Moving on to Adam, we've got 3 facts about Adam that we dug up from Wikipedia earlier, and one of them is Adam used to play rugby for England, and the other is he could run 100 meters in 11.5 distance. I suppose the normal answer to that one is it depends who's chasing him. But and the third one being that Adam was banned from 4,000 betting shops. Wow, Adam, tell us more.
Yeah, so I didn't play rugby for England, unfortunately. Never made the grade. Wasn't good enough. Played rugby for the Midlands, but never got to the England level. And that was when I was under 18, which was at the same time when I could run the 100 metres in sub 11.5 seconds, which probably helped out quite a bit with the rugby, given that I used to play as a front row forward. So I was pretty nippy with it as well. And then the 4,000 betting shops, that is true. I ran an operation that involved placing cash bets of bookmakers around the country, and that happened between about 2006 and 2010. We used to bet quite considerably on football coupons. The strength of that being that the odds compiler wrote the odds down on a Tuesday and the match took place on a Saturday, and quite often there'd be a game in between. People would get injured. People would get arrested for drunk driving like footballers do. Stuff would happen. Prices would change. But the coupons were obviously printed on paper and the prices couldn't change. So early days of the internet to an extent, but I mean, the internet had been around for a long time. So effectively we could trade those bets and make risk-free profit, which is what we did for a number of years. So the bookmakers are not in their businesses at the end of the day. I get that. I'm a little more sanguine about it these days than I was when I was getting banned left, right, and centre. But their businesses, they exist to make a profit, and they don't like people like me who know how to win ultimately. So we were, unceremoniously sometimes, ceremoniously at other times, shown the door, realistically.
Well, I'm just imagining in this sort of early days of the internet when obviously printing was probably much more prevalent, and these deliveries of 4,000 leaflets with your picture on it being going around the country, wanted, do not let this man in, so that's a great story. What I've heard before, and I'm really pleased you were able to share that.
Thanks, Rupert. Thanks.
So just as we close now, and thank you for joining us, everybody. This has been absolutely fabulous, and we'll try to get the sound sorted out in future ones. But we need to put our thinking caps on now. If you've enjoyed it, please let us know, and we'll try to put another question to the parties in the future. So just as we close, I'm going to look at the exit polls here. And we have to announce that Adam Lawrence is the winner tonight as a result of the crowd, but as quite a significant consolation, Andrew has managed to convert 15% of the audience over to his side, who actually came into the debate on the Resi side, and now will be making bids against Andrew out in the marketplace in the future.
No, that was not the objective.
Was it Northampton area? And okay.
I think so.
Yeah, thanks.
So loads of thanks to Adam and Andrew. That's been great fun, and thanks to you all for coming. And let's do some more fun stuff like this again.
Thanks for putting it together, Rupert. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys.
It's been great fun. You've been great sport, Adam.
And thanks, and so have you. And thanks to everyone for chipping in, and brilliant comments and questions. So that made it even better. So thanks very much, everybody.
It's a phenomenal there, I think.
We will end the meeting now.